The craziest mythical creatures in history. The kraken is the most feared sea monster ever described, and it wasn't just a bedtime story. In 1180, King Sverre of Norway wrote about it as if it were a known fact of ocean life. In 1752, Norwegian bishop Erik Pontoppidan dedicated an entire chapter to it in his Natural History of Norway, insisting the creature was real. He described it as roughly 1.5 miles in circumference, so large that sailors mistook its back for an island, made camp, lit fires, and only realized the truth when it began to sink. Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern biological classification, the man who built the entire system of naming species we still use today, initially listed the kraken in his Systema Naturae as a real animal. He quietly removed it from later editions. What people were almost certainly seeing was the giant squid, which can reach 60 feet long, has eyes the size of dinner plates, and wasn't officially confirmed by science until the 1800s. So for centuries, the ocean's most extraordinary real creature was considered too fantastical to be true, while the mile-wide island that sank sailors was filed under natural history. The bonacon was a bull with a horse's mane and horns that curved so far inward they were completely useless for fighting. Nature had given it a defense mechanism anyway, and it was significantly worse. When chased, the bonacon turned and fired, not like a bull charges. It fired its own dung. According to Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century AD, the excrement left the animal with such explosive force it could cover targets 600 meters away. Contact burned like acid. It scorched dogs, stripped hair from skin, and set fire to trees. The Aberdeen Bestiary, written around 1200 AD, upped the range to 3 acres. 3 acres of burning dung from a single retreat. Medieval scholars treated this with complete seriousness. Aristotle had described a version of it. Pliny confirmed it. It appeared in bestiaries across Europe for centuries, illustrated with hunters visibly covering their noses while the beast casually destroyed them from the rear. It was probably based on the European bison, which actually exists. The bison does not shoot acid from its backside. But nobody in medieval Europe knew that, and Pliny said otherwise, so that was that. The blemmyae were people with no heads. Their mouths and eyes were embedded directly in their chests. Herodotus, the Greek historian considered the founding father of history itself, wrote about them in the 5th century BC, as if reporting on a neighboring tribe. He placed them in Libya. Pliny the Elder confirmed them in the 1st century AD, writing that their eyes sat in their chests and their mouths on their shoulders. Then the Roman geographer Strabo wrote about them living in Nubia, along the Nile. Sir Walter Raleigh claimed to have encountered them personally in South America in 1595, describing them in his account of the Guyana expedition as living near the Caura River. Shakespeare put them in Othello. The explorer Marco Polo mentioned headless people in the Andaman Islands. For 2,000 years, across Greek, Roman, medieval European, and early modern accounts, headless men kept turning up in the fringes of the known world. The real blemmyae were an actual tribe in Nubia who gave the Romans serious trouble in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. They had heads. The confusion likely started when Herodotus used the Greek word for headless, meaning leaderless, and someone took it literally. That one translation error embedded itself into 2 millennia of world geography. The manticore came from Persia. The Greek physician, Ctesias, who served at the Persian royal court in the 5th century BC, described it in his book Indica as a creature he had personally heard about from reliable Persian sources. Body of a lion, face of a man, human enough to be unsettling, with 3 rows of teeth like a shark, a tail ending in a cluster of venomous spines it could fire like darts in any direction, including backwards. and it ran fast enough to outpace any animal alive. Aristotle wrote about it. Pliny the Elder confirmed it lived in India. Medieval European bestiaries repeated it as zoological fact for over 1,000 years. The manticore appeared on maps. It appeared in royal bestiaries kept by kings. The most commonly proposed origin is the tiger, filtered through multiple layers of travelers' tales, each telling adding another row of teeth. A tiger seen at distance through jungle, described by someone who'd never seen one before, translated twice, exaggerated once, and written down by a Greek doctor who'd never left Persia. That's how 3 rows of teeth and backwards-firing spine darts end up in serious natural history texts for 15 centuries. The Aspidoxylone was a sea creature so large that it was literally mistaken for land. Ancient Greek sailors described encountering what appeared to be a small island, dropping anchor, going ashore, building fires, and eating their meals. Then the island submerged. The creature was most commonly described as a whale, though some accounts called it a giant turtle. The earliest known version appears in the Physiologus, a 2nd century Greek Christian text that treated it as established natural fact. It spread through medieval European bestiaries and Islamic natural history texts alike. Arab geographers wrote about it. The creature appeared in the famous story of Sinbad the Sailor. Saint Brendan, the Irish monk, in the 6th century AD, reportedly celebrated Easter Mass on the back of one before it woke up and swam away, which the monks took as a miracle rather than a near drowning. The whale island became such an established literary trope that it appeared in John Milton's Paradise Lost in 1667. It almost certainly has roots in genuine encounters with sleeping whales, which can be substantial enough, at distance, to briefly confuse an exhausted sailor. The catoblepa lived in Ethiopia, and the only thing remarkable about it was that it killed everything that looked at it. Every account agreed on the basics. It was some kind of large, heavy-headed bovine creature that kept its head permanently pointed at the ground due to the sheer weight of its skull. This was a mercy, because the moment it raised its eyes, whatever met its gaze died instantly. Pliny the Elder described it in the 1st century AD, placing it near the source of the Nile. He wrote that its glance was fatal to men, but that fortunately the head was so heavy, the animal rarely raised it. Aelian, the Roman author writing in the 2nd century AD, confirmed it. The creature was still appearing in natural history texts in the Renaissance. Scholars have suggested it was probably based on sightings of the gyenu, or wildebeest, which does carry an unusually heavy head and walks with it lowered. The gyenu's gaze, for what it's worth, has never killed anyone. Pliny probably never visited Ethiopia either, but that didn't stop him writing about its wildlife with complete authority for 2,000 years of readers. The basilisk was the king of serpents, and it wasn't just deadly, it was aggressively, weaponized, architecturally deadly. Ancient Roman sources described a snake no more than 12 inches long. What it lacked in size, it compensated for with a gaze that killed instantly, a touch that killed instantly, and breath that was toxic enough to kill birds in flight and shatter rocks over time. Pliny the Elder wrote that a man on horseback once killed a basilisk with a spear, and the venom traveled up through the spear and killed both the man and the horse. The only things that could kill it were weasels, whose musk was its one weakness, and mirrors, because it could be killed by its own reflected gaze. Sailors knew that it killed birds mid-flight, which meant ships could detect its presence because the sky around it went silent and empty. By the Middle Ages, it had grown legs, a crown, and wings, becoming more like a small dragon. Pope Leo IV reportedly killed one living under Rome in 847 AD. The source for this account is the Pope's own biography. A 12th century building project in Warsaw was held up because workers claimed a basilisk was living in the cellar. They reportedly hired a criminal facing death to go down wearing a suit of mirrors. He came back up alive. The basilisk did not. The basilisk was probably inspired by the Egyptian cobra, whose raised hood from a distance with its distinctive eye markings could be genuinely intimidating, and whose venom was legitimately lethal. The rest was embellishment, written down by people who had never been to Egypt and distributed as fact for 1,500 years. The rock was a bird large enough to carry elephants, not metaphorically. Physically lift a full-grown elephant from the ground and carry it back to its nest to feed its chicks. Marco Polo encountered accounts of it on his travels in the 13th century and wrote it into his journals, placing it in Madagascar. He reported that the Great Khan sent a mission to investigate, and that the envoys returned with a feather, supposedly 90 spans long, which would put it at approximately 45 feet. The Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta wrote in the 14th century that he once saw what he thought was a mountain on the horizon, and later realized it was a rock. The rock appeared in 1001 Nights as a creature Sinbad encountered twice. It appeared in Persian poetry. It appeared in Arab geography. It appeared on medieval maps as an established fact of the Indian Ocean. The most widely proposed explanation is that it was based on the Haast's eagle of New Zealand, the largest eagle ever known to exist, which genuinely hunted prey many times its own weight and only went extinct around 1400 AD. Maori oral tradition describes exactly such a bird. It may also have been inspired by enormous fossilized eggs of the elephant bird of Madagascar, found by traders and carried back to the Arab world. Real eggs from a real extinct giant bird, filed as rock eggs. Sometimes myth and reality are just the same thing at different dates. The nuckelavee was described by the people of Orkney, the Scottish islands off the north coast, as the single most purely evil creature in existence. Not the most powerful, the most malevolent. There were no good days for the nuckelavee, no exceptions, no stories of mercy. It existed only to destroy. When it came ashore in winter, freed from the restraint of the mither of the sea, who kept it caged in the depths during summer, it brought drought, plague, crop failure, and livestock death. People in Orkney refused to say its name without immediately saying a prayer. The 19th century folklorist Walter Traill Denison recorded the only known direct encounter account from a farmer named Tamas, who met it on a coastal path one night. Tamas described what looked like a man on horseback until it got close enough to see properly. It was a horse and rider fused into a single body, completely skinless. Black blood running through yellow veins, muscles exposed and moving. The man's torso had no legs and arms long enough to reach the ground. The horse had one eye, red and burning, a mouth like a whale's that exhaled toxic vapor, a head on the man that was 3 feet wide and rolled side to side as it moved, barely attached. Denison wrote that Tamas survived only because he remembered the one thing that repelled it. The nuckelavee could not cross fresh water. He ran for a stream. The creature's hand caught his hat but missed his head. It made a sound described as a wild, unearthly yell and stopped at the bank. Tamas fell unconscious on the other side. He would apparently never discuss it again without significant persuasion. British folklorist Catherine Briggs, who spent her career cataloguing the demons and monsters of the British Isles, considered the nuckelavee the single nastiest creature in the entire canon of Scottish folklore. That is a competitive category. The vegetable lamb of Tartary was a plant that grew sheep, not figuratively. Medieval European and Islamic scholars genuinely believed there existed, somewhere in Central Asia, a botanical species that produced a fruit in the shape of a lamb, which was connected to the stalk by its navel, grazed the surrounding grass until it had eaten everything within reach, and then died when the food ran out. John Mandeville described it in his travels in the 14th century as an established fact of the Scythian region. It appeared in natural history texts. It appeared on maps. Rabbi Isaac ben Samuel of Acre mentioned it in the 13th century. Francis Bacon referenced it. Sir Hans Sloane, who founded what became the British Museum, obtained a specimen in the early 18th century and announced it was a fabrication constructed from a Scythian fern root, carved and dressed to look like a lamb, which it was. The fern, Cibotium baramets, has a woolly rhizome that, when the root is trimmed and inverted, does look vaguely like a crouching animal with fur. Someone found one. Someone told someone else. Someone wrote it down. And for 400 years, the botanical lamb of Central Asia was a standard feature of world geography. The Mongolian death worm is technically still active. Western science has never confirmed it exists, but Mongolians have been reporting it for centuries. They call it the Olgoi Korkoi, meaning large intestine worm, because of what it looks like. Reports describe a fat, dark red creature between 2 and 5 feet long that lives in the Gobi Desert, emerges in summer, and kills in 2 ways, either by spitting a corrosive venom that causes immediate death on contact or by discharging electricity from its body across open ground. Roy Chapman Andrews, the American explorer widely believed to have partially inspired Indiana Jones, heard about it during his 1920s expeditions through Mongolia and reported it seriously in his 1926 book On the Trail of Ancient Man. The Mongolian government has taken it seriously enough that several formal expeditions went looking for it in the 1990s and 2000s. None found it. Proposed explanations include the death adder, whose range doesn't extend that far, various large worm species, and possibly a misidentified amphisbaenian, a legless lizard with bilateral symmetry that moves in both directions and looks, in fairness, deeply unpleasant. Mongolian herders continue to report it. Nobody has produced a body. The Gobi is large. The strix was what ancient Rome was genuinely afraid of in the dark. Not wolves, not bandits. The strix. It was described as a bird, sometimes owl-like, sometimes more ambiguously formed, that flew at night and drank the blood of sleeping infants. Roman law specifically addressed it. Ovid described it in the Fasti. Petronius mentioned it in the Satyricon. Pliny the Elder catalogued it as an actual animal species in his natural history, though he noted that its existence was mysterious even to him. Roman mothers used specific rituals and amulets to protect their children from it. In the Middle Ages, it evolved. The strix became the strega, the Italian witch. Eastern European folklore developed it into the strigoi, which is the root word for what Bram Stoker eventually called Dracula. So the Roman blood-drinking night bird, treated as a genuine zoological threat by Pliny the Elder and addressed by Roman statute law, became the template for the entire vampire tradition in Western culture. Every vampire film, every vampire novel, every Halloween costume traces a direct line back to an owl that ancient Romans legally protected themselves against.